As NBA fans, we love to put labels on players. If a player has the label 3 and D attached to them, we all know they can shoot and play defense. It's a nice way of making the game easier for our brains to process. However, this can sometimes lead to us oversimplifying things, and as a result, misunderstanding them. I think that's exactly what's happening with Gonzaga big man Chet Holmgren. Coming into this college basketball season, Chet was given the rare label of unicorn, a player who possesses a unique combo of 7-foot height with the fluidity and skills of a guard. And it's led to most analysis around Chet sounding something like this.
Chet would have to get a lot bigger to do what he's doing right now in the NBA. So we can stop with that.
Get the man some carbs.
He just wasn't physical enough to deal with, the strength of the Duke players.
It's as if we've already attached a flowchart of possible outcomes to him. If he stays skinny, he won't live up to the unicorn title, and thus will likely be a bust. On the flip side, if he does manage to add weight, he'll be a franchise-changing player. That stark contrast in outcomes makes Chet come off as a highly risky draft pick. But after watching most of Chet's run with Team USA at the U19 World Cup, and every minute of his time at Gonzaga so far, I feel confident in saying despite his uniquely skinny frame, Chet's going to be a really good NBA player. And he's not really the player most people think he is. Chet's always had elite shot blocking numbers, and that's translated to his time at Gonzaga, where he's currently averaging 3.5 blocks per game. Yet it's not the sheer volume of blocks that impresses me the most, it's the diverse ways and situations he's able to affect shots in. When I first started watching Chet's film, I noticed something odd. While we're used to players sending shots back into the crowd or pinning them to the backboard, a lot of Chet's blocks seem to slowly fall straight back into the ground. And it wasn't until I started watching them in slow motion that I began to see why. A lot of his blocks are actually mid-air swipe downs. Chet's so good at locating the ball and his upper body is so flexible that while he's mid-air contesting a shot, he notices these opportunities to poke the ball free from a finisher mid-shot. And not only does he notice, he's actually precise enough to capitalize on these windows without fouling. In addition to this, he does a great job when helping or recovering. He pairs his long strides with quick hip turns, which enable him to rapidly cover a lot of ground. He's never truly out of a play, and it forces the offensive player to beat him multiple times in order to score. If Chet's going to spend time as a power forward at the next level, he's going to occasionally need to defend on the perimeter, and these recovery tools are going to help cover a lot of his flaws in that aspect. An obvious concern with Chet's interior defense is his ability to hold his own against NBA caliber athletes. In his time at Gonzaga, it's been a bit of a mixed bag, with Chet sometimes allowing players to attack his chest and get him off balance, but at the same time, he's often able to absorb contact with his lower body, which helps mitigate the space created. We got to see both sides of this in Gonzaga's matchup with Duke, where Chet was able to absorb contact with his lower body and stand strong on a pair of possessions against fellow top prospect Paolo Banchero, and another where he blocked Adrian Griffin Jr. At 6'10", 250 and 6'6", 220, those are two of the strongest guys in this season's draft class, and Chet was able to handle them. Yet there was one glaring possession where Paolo got the ball in motion and was able to get his shoulder into Chet's chest for the bucket and the foul. Chet especially shows promise when absorbing contact at the rim as a weak side rim protector. Against straight line drivers, Chet's able to shuffle himself in the way and absorb contact with his lower hip. And against wider angles and baseline drives, he uses his long reach to swat even the highest arcing of finishes. If you want to be a great defender in the modern NBA, you need to offer some form of versatility, and that's no different for Chet. While his defending away from the basket isn't as elite, he still shows a lot of promising skills in a couple areas. I really like a lot of what Chet shows while covering the mid-range as a drop defender against the pick and roll. He has great spatial awareness, and his long reach allows him to leave ball handlers a bit more space, but still be in range to contest. And with how quickly he can flip his hips, he doesn't need to do much backpedaling, which can be challenging for guys his size. A big part of Chet's awareness in space is due to his constant court mapping. It's really cool to watch how many times Chet flicks his head during a possession to track his man off ball while staying engaged with what's happening on ball. I think if Chet's able to improve the way he leverages these skills as he develops, he could become one of the best drop defensive bigs in the league. And I think that's a more attainable high-end outcome for Chet than some of the offensive comparisons he can often draw. The pathway for Chet's offensive game translating is pretty simple. He's currently shooting 36.8% from deep on about 2.5 attempts per game, and is a solid 71% from the free throw line. In addition, his current 3.9 assists per 40 minutes put him ahead of where top passing bigs like Bam, Cat, and Evan Mobley were in college. That combo of shooting and passing gives him a nice floor of being a really useful connective player on the offensive end. At this point, the most impressive thing about Chet offensively is his play in transition. He often grabs defensive rebounds and is comfortable enough as a ball handler to lead the break. Occasionally, he can struggle to deal with early pressure in the backcourt, but most of the time he's able to use a behind-the-back move to get past these full-court presses. While he's still not fully comfortable shooting off the dribble in the half-court, he seems much more comfortable pulling up in transition. He also does a great job when shooting on the catch or making late cuts for a dunk when trailing the play. And so far this season, he has an unreal adjusted field goal percentage of 103.6 in transition. Because adjusted field goal percentage weights 3-point shots as more than 2-point shots, you can actually go over 100%, and a quarter of the way through the season, Chet's still above that mark. A lot of Chet's best passing and playmaking also shines brightest in these transition possessions. Most of Chet's one-handed passes come in this way, and it opens up a lot more angles and windows for him as a passer. He'll occasionally also whip out a full-court outlet pass too. I would describe Chet's half-court offense as more useful than good. He's heavily reliant on his height, but being able to pass over the heads of most defenders creates a lot of functional value and really carries his half-court offense. I would have concerns about this translating, but we're seeing how easy being a 7-foot passer translates to the NBA right now with Cavs rookie Evan Mobley. Chet's also able to space the floor as primarily a catch-and-shoot threat, and teams have to respect him out there, which opens up the paint for his teammates. He uses a dip to generate power for his shot, which an NBA team will likely try and remove. By bringing the ball low on the dip, he's negating his height, which is his best advantage as a shooter. Off ball, he's able to tap into his spatial awareness and high feel for the game to make some nice cuts, and does a good job of relocating himself to fill dangerous open spaces. And I think his off-ball skill would show up more often if he were playing with a good lob thrower. One concern I have when watching Chet's off-ball offense comes when he's faced with a closeout. His handle is good enough to attack these closeouts and drive to the basket, but he often gets so caught up in the decision-making between shooting and driving, it can lead him to squandering the advantage altogether. I do think Gonzaga's system and personnel aren't an ideal offensive fit for Chet, which could be hiding some of his true offensive skill. Right now, most of Chet's on-ball offensive reps come in transition, but I would love to see him operate as a passer in the short roll. When he does get chances to operate from the in-between area, he does a great job of picking apart opposing defenses. Although, I do like what he does in the high-low game with Drew Timme, even if we don't get to see it as much as I'd like. As a scorer right now, Chet's best suited as a play finisher around the basket. He has solid touch with both hands and is currently shooting 93.9% at the rim with a nice blend of layups and dunks. Chet's drawn some lofty comparisons to offensive players like Kevin Durant, but he's not really able to beat defenders off the dribble, and his height limits the functionality of his handle. If Chet's going to become an offensive star at the NBA level, it's going to come through his post game. It's not supernatural for him yet, but he does show flashes of being able to convert on a plethora of fadeaway spins. I don't think it's likely that this becomes a major part of his game, as he's still pretty raw in that area and has almost no face-up game whatsoever, but I wouldn't rule it out as a possibility. As an NBA player, Chet's going to work well in most defenses due to his capabilities as both the primary and secondary rim protector, and if he's able to capitalize on his tools as a drop defender, I could see him becoming one of the premier defensive players in the NBA. While I think it's possible that Chet could develop into a high-volume scorer through the post, I don't think he's likely to surpass the mid-teens on a nightly basis. He will likely find most of his offensive value as a connective passer or in some higher end outcomes as a tall playmaking hub. Chet's likely to go in the first 2 picks in the NBA draft, and I think some good fits for him would be the San Antonio Spurs, Detroit Pistons, and Toronto Raptors, but I like his fit best with the Houston Rockets. The idea of big-to-big passing between Chet, Christian Wood, and Alperen Şengün isn't something most NBA teams are equipped to deal with, and I think his ability to cover a lot of ground defensively could help hide the Rockets' defensive weaknesses, while his overall versatility as a rim protector would allow seamless lineup flexibility with Houston's other bigs.
Holmgren is the real deal. I don't want to hear about he's not strong enough, physical enough.